Shelf Hangers, episode number 4. We're no longer doing it for Dale like last episode. We are now on number 4. I don't have any, Suppa's car. Let's go to the Suppa.
Suppa.
The 4S. Anyways, welcome everybody to the Shelf Hangers. Brought to you by Great Lake Speed Shop, Martin Dynamics, Close Racing Supply, Carpy's Print Co., The Mountain, 106.3. I'm sure there's a whole 100 other sponsors on Jesse's car. I'm joined by the Mini Late Model King, the Burger King, third generation racer, and my biggest pain in the ass, Jesse Isidore. And fighting out of the other corner, guy who works on race cars, third generation in the sport, Jason Fan. Ooh.
Do you feel a little bit insulted by that intro, Jason? I mean, he just
he just give you
I know. He calls me the Burger King, the Mini King, the Goat King, the best guy in the whole planet. Then he's like, guy who works on a car sometimes. He's an idiot, Jason.
iRacing setup god, Jason Fan.
Hell yeah, that was the most beautiful setup we've ever had.
Coming off of the Carpy's Cup, Jason set up the SR8 car for our iRacing League, and it was pretty good. It was so good, in fact, that Jesse quit because he just had to sit back and admire the work and look at how soft that right rear spring was.
That's it, dude.
See, I was real soft on the left rear, trying to get that wing out of the air.
Something like that.
Well, with that car, I was trying to get more speed.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
So coming up this week, depending on this, we'll probably go up either the day before or the day of. It's the 5th anniversary of Whoa Nelly Productions race at McKean County Raceway. Very excited. We're looking at over 30 cars for the night, and very excited about that. Jesse will be there with the mini lates. Is your dad going to be racing that thing back together yet?
No, we haven't gotten it back together. I've been really tied up with business stuff, and I haven't been able to help him, and he hasn't been particularly motivated on it. So, we got a lot of shit going on. It's hard to find time to do anything. So,
yeah,
you're lucky to see me 3 days a week if it happens.
Well, which is why it's way past my bedtime that we're starting this.
Yeah, typical Daniel.
Well, it's going to be good. 7 o'clock time trials. We're going to time trial those guys so they don't we ran into some complaints with a draw-redraw format, especially when you start getting, it's $1,500 to win. You start redrawn, and you get guys up front that maybe shouldn't be up front. Not saying that not everybody deserves their chance to start up front, but for $1,500, people do a lot of stupid things, and I've seen it for a lot less. I'm sure both of you guys have seen, a lot more than me over, probably a ham sandwich for whatever they were racing for. And so that leads me to our first topic, something that a lot of people brought up, and when I was going through the race about putting on a race and formats. What do you think is good for the race car drivers themselves in more of a competitive sense? Ooh. And what do you think puts on the best show as a format? I only ask because this came up with how wild the Eldora Dream format is, because it really takes a mathematician to really figure out what's going on there. And also coming up with my format this year for McKean, we got there and we're doing time trials and then drawing for an invert, which is a little bit better than redrawing, but we can't make everybody happy. But what do you guys think? What do you think puts on the best show? And what do you guys think?
So, you just asked two things. What puts on a best show or better show, and what's better for the drivers? Obviously, I'm going to side with what is better for the drivers would be the qualifying. But what puts on the better show to me is the pill draw because it's a lot more random. Personally, from the spectator side of it and what I grew up with going to McKean County, it was always pill draw style. That's what I prefer to see. You know, you're going to have somebody that shouldn't be on the front row. They're either going to find their way to the back or they're going to find their way in somebody else's car. It's unfortunate, but that's the entertainment side of the sport. But even though with the qualifying method, sometimes people miss it in the qualifying, so sometimes you still might have somebody faster during the feature that's towards the back. But I sometimes, and I'll say this down south, not every class needs to qualify. When you've got 8 different classes at a track with between, some have low number counts or whatever, but 8 classes of cars do not need the opportunity to qualify in one night. It just drags the night on too long, and then you're not having any fun at the racetrack as a spectator. At least that's where I feel about it.
Isn't down south there? I'm not saying like, oh, down south they do this, that, but don't they? They are always notorious for running tons of
30-hour shows
and hot laps qualifying for
hot
everybody.
Lap qualify, no heat race, straight to the features. A lot of the times, how it goes.
Well, that's not too bad.
Yeah.
But I'm more saying because there's always this thing, and let's say it's state line, and this is something that gets brought up a lot. If you win the week before, you have to start 6th, no matter if you win your heat race. Like if you win your heat race,
I love it.
You have to start 6th. If you win 2 weeks in a row, you have to start 12th. And now here's something that in a class that is the upper class where people kind of respect. Not saying like you're going to have 11 guys in front of you that are going to respect your car and your space and getting around there, and we say give and take, and a lot of guys take and not no give. When you're trying to race around those kind of guys, it kind of sucks. So what do you feel about a format like that where you're punishing a guy for, not saying punish, but you're punishing a guy for doing good, and doing good again gets you an even worse punishment to try to mix it up. And when you're trying to run for like weekly points, for example, the Rush Late Model Series you don't just run for points at your local track, you run points against everybody that runs a Rush sanctioned race weekly. So you're telling me if you show up to state line and win, then you have to start 6th. And, crates are probably the most difficult thing in the world to pass a ton of guys in. People like around this area do that. There are some really good guys. But for guys that are still, maybe fighting for that 5th, 6th spot in the weekly points, it really does hurt. So
I think you have to separate this into a couple of groups, right? So like everybody seems to get salty about race format around big shows, right? So like what's good for a big show isn't necessarily good for your week in, week out racing. So like if you have a track and we're talking about your every Friday night you're going to run this format, right? I like pill draw for that. I like pill draw because listen, man, why do we got to qualify every week? Like the only guys that I see begging for qualifying every week are the guys who want to win every single week, and everybody wants to win every single week, right? I'm not saying that that's like a specific group of guys, but like you all know this guy, right? It's a guy who has $100,000 car in a class full of $30,000 cars. He might even have 3 of them, and he shows up and goes from last to first every week, And here's the thing: I don't blame him for doing that. I don't blame him for wanting that. That's that dude's prerogative, right? And we all love racing, and some people don't have the ability to go touring and things like that. You're not going to get any judgment from me. But don't start trying to add like qualifying to every event because you're going to qualify top 3. Okay? Like I really feel sincerely like qualifying should be limited to really big events, like 3,000 to 5,000 maybe. I mean, I like more around the $10,000 mark, but if we're trying to quantify it on a local level, 3 to 5,000 is the mark, you know. I just, once you get a little carried away where it's like, oh, well, we're making 800 instead of 600 to win this week, everybody better qualify. You know, it just starts getting a little, you know, you're adding, you're adding an hour to the whole production. There's other ways to make the race feel like a big deal. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to like have qualifying every week, or not even every week, every big race. I really like the pill draw format, if for no other reason than it speeds along the production. And also, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose in the pill draw format. Like, sometimes, like, if you're redrawing the top 12 or the top 4, and most tracks now, they redraw the top 4. So, like, the worst case scenario, you're going to end up, like, in the top 10. You know? Just calm down, man. It's not like you're going to go from first to 32nd. You know? I mean, and if you're that badass and you're that fast, get there, dude. It's a big race already, so we're already in the like 25 to 35 lap range, right? So
you should have time.
You have time, and I understand why people weren't qualifying, especially in certain classes. Like there's a couple of classes right now. I don't need to name any names where it's just chaos right now. I mean, a lot of new guys in cars that they're not used to, just sending it. All right. And there's a lot of cars getting wadded up, a lot of chassis getting bent, a lot of frustration being had. And I hate to be that guy, but qualifying ain't going to fix that problem. It really ain't. Because, you know, your heat race is still going to get broke down to 5 people, 6 people, right?
Wow.
A really big one's, 8 people? So, I mean, homeboy that can hold her to the wood and let Jesus take the wheel, he's still going to be able to cause damage, right? Especially if you didn't qualify in the poll, you know? So, that's my 2 cents on it. I think people put a lot of stock in qualifying.
And well, another thing qualifying can do, too, is sometimes people might be good at laying a single lap, but they might not have racecraft developed.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so then all of a sudden you've got somebody that's fast, that's out, maybe not the front row, but like second or third row, but doesn't know how to race around other people. So now you're having this person that, what's the term we want to use? Is a weapon, dangerous, you know,
right.
Is maybe around other cars that have more potential to actually compete when the race is going on, but again, they're only fast when they're on the track by themselves and then don't know how to maneuver around other vehicles.
Right. And I mean, I just, people always present qualifying like it's the solution to all your problems. And
it's an anti-solution.
And I understand, like, in these big races, I get it. Like, especially if you're like 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 grand to win, you're right. You do have to have qualifying because there can be 0 excuses, 0 favoritism, 0. It's got to be 100% merit. Right. But it is not uncommon for me to see guys on the internet talking about how we should be qualifying every week. It's like, okay.
No.
And how do you scale that? Do we all qualify every week? Well, no, just my class. It's like, yeah, you and everybody else in every other class is going to say the same thing. Everybody's going to say, not everybody, just my class. It's like, I mean, unless you're in the super lates, I don't want to hear it. You know, I mean, I maybe I'm a little cynical on that particular thing because, like, where do you draw the line, right? Like, so the super lates are the only ones that I see have maybe a legitimate argument here.
Yeah.
Or, well, the 410s too, obviously, but we don't live in 410 country, right? So that's not throwing shade on sprint cars in any way. It's just a reality that we don't really get to see them much. If your class is the star of the show and like you're a touring series or you're the super lates on the docket that night, I'm yawning already. You got me, Daniel. You fucked me. You really fucked me, Daniel. It's all your fault. But if you're the super lates and you're the star of the show on that night, okay, let them have that conversation. Do they want to qualify or do they want to pill draw? I don't get to have an opinion there, right? They're the star of the show on that night. I'll wait however long I got to wait, and we'll let it play out. But to me,
star of the show, special, I'm with that.
Yeah. And it just feels to me like we get a little lost in this conversation where it's like we talked last week about the drivers being like, look at me, look at me, look at me. And this qualifying versus pill draw thing, everybody looks at what would be better for me in this scenario? Well, I'm going to qualify well. Therefore, we should qualify, right? Mm-hmm. And they have a whole laundry list of reasons as to why this is the case, right? Because it'll keep the squirrels at the back. It'll do this. It'll do that. They have a whole laundry list of reasons why this is the better of the two evils, right? But the reality is if there's 20 cars, you're going to get broken up into 4 heats of 5. If these squirrels that you speak of are that big of a problem, they're just 2 rows behind you, right? If they're going to be a problem, they're going to be a problem regardless, man. They may not take out the guy on the pole, or they might. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, depends on how you drive it in. They might.
It really I understand the idea of it being a meritocracy. The fastest car every night wins the race. But I feel like the show just moves better with a pill draw. Like, everybody shows up, they draw their pill, they go to their trailer, they get their car ready, we all go out for heat races. And then the show just goes on. But every single time I've been to one of these tracks that loves qualifying, every single time, it's like, the first 3 hours is us watching the 4 cylinders, the UMPs, the Pro Mods, the street stocks. They're all out qualifying, and then then every heat race is just one guy walking away from everybody and the other guy's fighting in the middle. Mm-hmm. It adds so much time to the event. I think overall it kills the racing of the event. And is there some innocent casualties there? For sure. But I'm not so sure that you wouldn't be an innocent casualty anyway. I really am not. If the guys in your class are that big of a problem and you're that worried about them, you need to either have a conversation with them, help them, or move to a different class. That's where I'm at with the whole thing. I mean, maybe I was a little long-winded on that, but I feel like I've heard this conversation just for 20 years, and everybody has the same argument. It really boils down to, I'm fast, therefore I should be allowed to qualify. And the other side of the argument is, I'm not, therefore you shouldn't be allowed to qualify. And the truth be told, I think both are a mixed bag. Can we at least agree on that?
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're just a mixed bag. So that's my 2 cents on the whole thing.
I can tell you, one of the first times I attended one of the tracks down here, there was like 119 cars in the pits at the track that night. Mm-hmm. 119 cars got 3 laps of hot laps and 3 laps to qualify.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what happened? We left the track at 9:30 because we didn't see any racing, and we had other stuff to do.
Yep.
That's a problem. I go to watch racing. I don't want to go to watch cars practice basically all the time. Yeah. If I go to watch cars practice, I'm probably there rolling in the dirt underneath it at some point. But you can't have 119 cars running 6 laps by themselves.
Yeah,
it's not entertaining. That doesn't help draw a crowd to the track. That's honestly a deterrent for a lot of people.
For almost everybody.
Yeah,
for almost everybody. I mean, and that's why I said if it's one class, okay, I'll hear you out. If it's the main event, I'll hear you out. Okay, so what is there at most 30 cars? So yeah, you're adding an hour to the event. Right, but it's a slippery slope when you start talking about qualifying in your weekly events. It just is, because the next thing you know, it starts with the super lates qualify every week. Next thing you know, the UMP guys want to qualify every week, and then the UMP guys get what they want. So now you have 2 hours of qualifying every week, right? And then everybody in the pro mods is like, well, hey man, what the heck? They get to do it, but we don't get to do it, And it's like, and I feel like that's the situation down south. Is it's like, okay, whatever, everybody gets to do it. This is just how we format things now, right? And
yeah,
that frustrates me, because you're really working against having your own fans enjoy your product, I mean, so like everybody loves NASCAR probably more than dirt track racing, the general public, right? How many people tune in for qualifying though?
Barely any.
I'll bet you it's a 15th of the people who watch the actual race. I mean, maybe,
Yeah.
So
it's
that's
limited.
my 2 cents.
It's incredibly limited.
How many people are watching practice too?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah,
if we had the Speed Network back.
Nothing to do on a Wednesday afternoon at 11 a.m.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
We're all not just sitting there waiting for the big show to start, which I understand. And I think we kind of got this. I think we kind of looked way too far into qualifying on this other. I mean, I think there's pros and cons to both. There's a lot of guys that won't show up if you're running a big show and you're not doing qualifying, which I have ran into, being on this side of things all of a sudden. But that's okay. You can't make everybody happy. And in our case, we needed to give the mod guys hot laps anyways. So why not, put them to good use?
Right.
If some guy unloads out of the box real fast, let him start up front.
I may sound really disgruntled about this topic, and I don't mean to sound that way, but like my beef with it is it's so cyclical, right? Like it's like a snake eating its own tail, because there's no right answer here. And like I always fall back on what's best for the show. And I think it's almost unanimous, like from the fan perspective, the best thing for the show is just pill draw, And if you're worried about the integrity of the race and you want to go with qualifying, I have nothing against that, right? Make the decision and run with it, But I always see this conversation bleed into the week to week stuff, and that's where I get a little disgruntled about it. You know what I'm saying? So I don't want to sound like a negative Nancy.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like I've seen some cool, formats before, and I mean, even one-off events. I would love to see an Australian pursuit around here. They run those down at Port Royal where, if you get past, I think you're eliminated in like a 10-lap dash. That's really cool. King of the Hills is a cool little format. There's all these other things that, creep around. But yeah, this whole qualifying versus redraw thing. And, there's no right answer how many spots to redraw, but there always can be too many.
Right.
Jason, you want to test your mic now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, we're still good. Let's go.
Oh, sweet.
All right, so our next topic, not to keep going boring everybody about formats, because I feel like even though we could talk all day about what's right and what's wrong, whatever.
I don't think that was boring. I think that was just like...
I think it was insightful.
I think it's something that maybe people might not think about well in the stands, and I think that's something that, we can bring to the table here, being on all sorts of different sides, whether you're, racing the car, taking pictures of the car, and promoting events, and whatever the hell Jason does, sits around and picks his nose while he watches racing.
That's definitely it.
Poor fella.
Pivoting to a different topic, this is something that, again, come up this weekend. I usually try to take a couple topics that I hear through my travels, and this is something that might be controversial, but do you guys believe that a track could be too fast? And this comes from some conversations I've had about some local tracks. We can name names if we really want to, because I'm sure it's very apparent which couple there could be. And it really comes down to going too fast on a track that might not be great for going that fast on, whether it be not necessarily dangerous, but a place where you can tear a lot of shit up if you're too fast. Where like if the racing groove is wide ass open and you got to check up, you're gonna get ran over by the guy in front of you, type of deal. Which is racing. I mean, it happens. We see it all the time everywhere. If you check up and the guy behind you got nowhere to go, but here, there's a couple of places that I've gone to recently where I really had the thought of, man, this might be just a little too fast for its own good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know if I buy into any track being too fast for its own good, but I mean, there's something to be said with like it's certain tracks. So we had talked about Freedom and MCR, right? In MCR, the high side seems to struggle. There's not really a high side anymore. I always remember McKean as having like a badass cushion and a really high rim. And they cut it down a lot, which I don't think was a net negative for the racing. I think it's a similar experience. It's just changed the grooves a lot. You're fighting over the middle and bottom now. And I mean, I think we're in a turnover spot in the sport, right? There's a lot of new talent coming up and a lot of old talent left. And what you're left with is a split right down the middle. Guys that look very green and guys that look like a well-oiled machine. Okay? And you see that talent differential on full display sometimes, And those are always dicey eras in a sport like ours because you're costing people a lot of money when you do step on your pecker. But I don't necessarily know if I buy the too fast for your own good thing. I think Freedom is a tough one because Freedom has a weird D shape, right? You might have an argument there because Freedom really pinches you on corner exit and 4. And a lot of people
funnels you right to the fence.
Yeah, and a lot of people get claimed by the concrete wall.
It's that, and just so everybody knows, I am a huge supporter of Freedom, and I love the racing there. We've had some really great late model racing.
Oh, yeah, me too.
At that place, as of late. This isn't hating on the racing product because I've seen some really good races there in the past year or so that they've. Whether it be the crate stuff, the super late model stuff, and not to hype my own self up with that UMP race that we put in there, where there was a lot of passing. So, a lot of passing. You really got to be skillful at Freedom. I think that comes with the speed. But man, I was there for the sprint cars, and we did have a pretty nasty wreck with a sprint car there, and glad that he only got I think some compression fractures in his back, which isn't great, but the way that it looked, it should have been probably way worse, but the safety equipment did its job. But when those sprint cars were ripping around there, dude, I was getting a little kind of antsy on there because I was like, whoa. It felt like jets in a gymnasium almost. And of course, you guys say about the funnels. Wyatt Scott, I believe, said it best to me the one day where you can be 37 wide coming out of turn 4, but you better get back to the bottom going into 1 because you ain't going to really like what happens to you if you run the top going into 1 and 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, where I was going with that, I wasn't talking shit about Freedom. What I was saying is, like, the speed isn't necessarily as much the problem at Freedom as, like, you really, the track by its nature, it's got, like, a sweeping corner with a sweeping backstretch, so you're always kind of turning. So it puts you in a position where you're always sliding up coming in or cutting down to come out. right? So you're either coming in high and cutting low, or you're coming in low and floating high, right? So it's one of, sorry, my dogs are barking, but it's it's one of those tracks where you got a lot of juking and jiving going on, right? And when you get in those positions, sometimes you run out of room, because especially when you start the 2-3 wide thing, I mean, you might be coming in high to cut low and there's somebody there, or there's somebody on the outside when you're trying to come in high, or, and you get these big runs on people going down the backstretch, and you get them above and below them. And it's the last minute decision making at tracks like that where you really get punished, So I think that I think tracks like that produce great race car drivers, though. I don't necessarily think. I mean, you're gonna see them make blunders for sure, but I don't think necessarily they're too fast for their own good. I want to see tracks like that stay around.
Is it they're too fast for their own good, or newer drivers can't see past their radiator caps?
That's part of it.
So again, Jesse said back in the day, MCR had this phenomenal cushion, right? You had cars high, you had cars low. It was a multi-lane track. It was fast. It was awesome. I miss it. I wish we had it back. But, and I understand that they have slowed it down some already in order for Bang Bang Nation to be able to run the track and whatnot. So, you've got to give the consideration to the smaller cars, the lesser classes, whatever you want to call them. But it drives me nuts to hear people complain the track's too fast. And it might not even be the shape of the track. I hear people complain that there's too much water in the track. I want it to slick up sooner. Dude, if you want the track to slick up, go take your treaded tires off the car. There's a pavement track somewhere waiting for you. Go race pavement. I don't need you at my dirt track with that attitude. Because I've heard that too many times down here in the South. My car's not set up for the track to not be black from top to bottom. I can't race if it's not black from top to bottom. Dude, there's a pavement track. Go to it. You're running a metric clip car. Get the fuck out of here. I'm not a fan of the tracks too fast thing. As Jesse just said, it develops a better driver. You've got to look beyond the end of your hood. You've got to anticipate what the other drivers are doing. Yeah, sometimes it's going to take more motor to get around the track or whatnot, but it's making sure that your setup is right. It's making sure your skills are right. And then there's just... I like a fast track. I also like watching a track like Bradford where it's slow and you gotta really get on the brakes, turn the car and stuff. But I like to watch cars get after. I like to see the drivers up on the wheel, and that's the spectator side of me. Although I know a fast track is a little more expensive on the car owner side. You're using the motor up a little more. You're probably going to be more. You're going to be harder on the tires. There's a handful of things. Yeah, sure, you might wreck harder if you're not watching. If you're watching your radiator cap, but
you could always use the left pedal too. I mean,
what's that like, dude?
That's an unpopular opinion in the modern day, it seems, but there is two of them.
There is something I wanted to also kind of put in here about so we're talking 2 example cases of like 3/8 of a mile, I'd say, tracks.
Right.
They're not big, they're not small. They're not Bradford, they're not they're not like a Path Valley. Lima Land's probably one of Lima Land, whatever. just, short tracks, Macon. It's not Macon. We're looking at just an average size track. But on the flip side, let's talk about, in the same vein, big tracks like West Virginia Motor Speedway failed. Well, that's an outlier. You can't, but like West Virginia Motor Speedway failed. Whether
it wasn't
it was
because it was too fast,
whether because track surface or whatever. But then you look at places like, some of that stuff doesn't, have such a great racing product. But you look at these big tracks that are, hard on cars and stuff like that maybe they don't do so well because drivers don't go to them. Your opinions on that, because I know one of the things they said about West Virginia and a lot of these big, maybe not half miles, but they're not as attended by drivers, whether it be the big half mile tracks, unless it's for specials, or they're closing at a rate. I can say one of them, Greater Cumberland, closed and now it's back open again this year. But like when we went with the Supers, they, I think, only had 15 to 18 show up, even though there's a whole ton of them in that area or greater area. So I mean, does that just come down to hard on equipment, an expense thing? Because that's a different. It's a different kind of too fast / a lot
of the tracks you're bringing up though are tracks that either had a revival, tracks that sound like they were never really popular to begin with. I mean, I don't know. I'm not real familiar with any of the tracks that you just brought up, so don't take this the wrong way. But like you're telling me about tracks that are kind of struggling, right? They were struggling before their resurgence, and then they went back to struggling. So I don't want to blame it on the product or whatever, but like it sounds to me like there's an underlying problem here that has very little to do with the track. Because like some of my favorite tracks are big and successful, right? Like, so let's take Williams Grove, Port Royal. There's a lot of big. I mean, I guess Eldora, like you said, it's an outlier. It's a $1 million+ facility, right? That's an outlier.
It used to not be.
They're only putting up, hundreds of thousands of dollars in purse money, where, it's worth going to a track like that, and whether you blow up your shit, flip your car over, which we can get to the Bloomquist Bab thing here shortly. I guess that's a great transition too, but the money's there, right? Like,
right. Well, I mean, like, so take all that out. We're not even talking about that. We're talking about
for people showing up,
the people showing up, the driver side of it. So like Little Valley is a legendary track in our region.
Love that track.
And the reason it closed had nothing to do with drivers not wanting to be there, fans not wanting to be there. From what I've heard, it was mostly political stuff. Right?
It was all fair board.
So, and I don't have an opinion on that. I don't know a whole lot about that. But what I will say is, the facility doesn't necessarily make or break a track. And you will find a segment of drivers. So, like, let me give you a couple common complaints from totally different tracks, right? So if you take big cars to a track like Bradford, there's not enough room to stretch our elbows out. We're all running into each other. We're junking shit. You go to a bigger track like Freedom or MCR, we're going too fast. We're running into each other. These guys don't know how to lift, right? And then you go to a place like Little Valley. I mean, you're flying around Little Valley, right? And the argument there would be like, well, we're going 120 miles an hour down the straight stretch. Every time somebody wrecks, it's a big one, right? Which you'd never actually heard that about Little Valley. Nobody ever whined about Little Valley, unfortunately. With Williams Grove, you have the backstretch wall claims all these cars, right? But all these features are the things that define the racetrack, right? So, gosh dang it, guys, quit arguing. My dogs are like arguing in the background. I don't know what's going on, but stop it. But those are defining each one of those tracks is going to teach you something different. You see what I'm saying? And instead of just saying that track has character and I'm learning something here, right? We sit there and weenie whine about the track conditions and I wish it did this, I wish it did that. Every track can't do everything, right? And the fans seem to love coming to all these facilities, you know? So, I mean, and there is typically facilities that shut down, and there's facilities that are notorious for opening, closing, opening, closing, opening, closing. And I think a lot of times when you're talking about a facility like that, I don't necessarily think it's as much the track is the core base of people that watch and people that go to race have lost faith in the product. You see what I'm saying? Because at one point these tracks were successful and then they're just not anymore, right? Like, so McKean went through a phase where people quit going and then they shut down, and you know, that's that. And it closed for years and now they reopened it, and I hope it sticks around. Usually the track isn't to blame. It's everybody blames the track when the track closes. They say it was too rough, it was this, it was that, it was this, it was that, you know. But somebody made that track work with that same surface at some point, right? So it tends to be a problem in the product. You see what I'm saying? And that's a hard conversation to have, because, you know, you got to try to figure out how to fix that. And each track is a different case-by-case basis. Some of it's the promotion side of it. Some of it's the track prep side of it. Some of it is the classes that are running there. Some of it is, you know, there's a lot of problems, and you got to figure out which one it is and isolate it, you know. And none of that, I think, has to do with the drivers. You're going to junk shit at every racetrack. I've seen people total cars at Bradford, and you're going like 50 miles an hour there, you know.
I've seen rear-wheel drive four-cylinders slip there.
Exactly. And, you know, they're going what? The speed of smell? So, you know what I mean? It's, you know, it's going 30, but
but it sounds fast as fuck, boy.
Just couldn't not. But I mean, you know, this is another one of those arguments that, like, we get into, you know, it's just a circle, you know, and it all comes back to stop blaming the driver and stop blaming the track. If a driver's that big of a problem, you need to ask him to leave. Okay? Let's get that out of the way. So, and if multiple drivers are that big of a problem, you need to ask them all to leave. You need to ask all the problem drivers to leave. And once you've asked all the problems to leave, I'll bet you your problems at the racetrack, they're still there. So, you know, that's, I mean, like I said, I don't know any of the tracks that you brought up, but the reality here is every track has its own character, and they all teach you something. So, I mean, I don't like conversations where we blame the track. I really don't, because there's a lot of tracks out there that are going to teach you something. Some of them are rough, some of them are smooth, some of them are slick, some of them are tacky, but there's something to be learned at all of them.
Yeah.
You know,
I think each track having their own characteristics is, you know, one thing. There definitely could be a case to be saying, hey, you know, oh, if only we could have this, it'd be better. And that's, you know, being on the side that I am, you know, I'm not a promoter of a racetrack, but I work with those folks, and, you know, I see the kind of work they put in to try to do everything they can to, you know, whether people are bashing them on Facebook or not, they don't really know what really goes on. In my eyes, you know, a lot of these guys are doing what they can with what they got, and nobody that promotes a racetrack or puts it together wants a junk ass surface. They don't want to be fucking killing cars every week so their car counts become low. For example, the Rush Pro Mod series this last weekend was a bloodbath, and I feel like we saw the numbers suffer because of it, just because, you know, shit happens. But, you know, no one wants to see that, and no one wants to see that because their track, and it wasn't a track issue. It definitely was, as Jason says, not looking past the radiator cap. Or whatever it was, you know, whatever.
Yeah, they're big. They're hard to see past.
So, everybody, shut the fuck up. They're trying their best. Everybody, listen. Anybody with 2 freaking eyeballs knows that a track is rough AF, okay?
Well, and here's the
you know
thing.
what I mean? So stop.
If you race at 2 tracks, one of them is baby-ass smooth and one of them is rough as hell, and you want the other track to be less rough, don't go up to the promoter and go, you are a scumbag and I hate you and your track sucks and I hope you die. Don't do that, all right? Go up to him and go, hey, man, I was at State Line the other day and they did XYZ and that really helped the track surface. Maybe we could try to do that here. Is there anything I can do to help? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that whole part of this conversation just gets totally lost. Like, I think the internet has turned us all into bitchy, whiny, morons. And I understand you as the driver, it's not your problem to make the racetrack right. Like, you have a job, which is the race car.
You're the show.
Yeah, you're the show, right? And I understand that you demand or you want a good racing surface. But there's a lot of people out there doing their best and trying to do this whole race and promoter thing because they really love it. And maybe they're struggling because they've never worked with dirt before. You, a race car driver who's been a race car driver for 20 years or whatever, you could go, hey, man, here's some examples of things that I've seen work really well. And I know this based on this much experience that I have. So you can take that advice or you cannot take that advice. That track promoter may just go, thank you so much. I needed to hear that. Because it might be a piece of equipment they already fucking have. They're just not using it right. You know what I mean? That's where I get frustrated in these arguments. And me and Jason have like fucking howled at the moon about this for months at this point. Where like the track prep conversation just gets so sidetracked by what everybody's opinion is of the track prep, And
the 100 ways to approach one task.
Exactly. And your little piece of advice might make everybody's life easier. Or maybe you have a really difficult track promoter who is kind of a dick. And in that case, maybe you need to take your money and go elsewhere. That's for you to decide. But I mean, in my experience, most track promoters are very open to hearing your input.
If it's constructive.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Input. Don't go on Facebook being like, these fucking idiots don't know what they're doing. This is the biggest shithole. Because then not only are you voicing your concerns and then you're done with it, then people are going to be like, okay, maybe some of you guys complain too much and they ignore you. But if it's somebody that doesn't complain all the time and you just kind of like throw it, if you're like tweeting into the void or Facebooking into the void thinking that it doesn't affect anybody, say it reaches 3 people that they're like, you're right, I won't show up. Then there's, I don't know, say $20 in the grandstand. So, $60 right there for the racetrack. That hurts them. It's a domino effect. Maybe, just have a conversation with the people running the track because, they want to succeed as much as you do.
Exactly. And nobody who runs a racetrack, nobody who goes out of their way to buy and or lease a racetrack, understand they're putting thousands of their own dollars every week on the line for this to succeed. They're not like, these are not people who like are just going home and floating in their gold and like, I just wanted to buy this racetrack to ruin it. You know what I mean? Like, I mean,
Scrooge McDuck.
yeah. Like, these are not guys who are like, I saw a racetrack and I bought it just to ruin it.
Well, I mean, if you're, what is it, CarMax? That's what you're doing.
Well, maybe I don't know. I don't know what they've bought, but I mean, my thing is every promoter I've ever talked to, like I've talked to Bradford a dozen times in the last 2 years. Like at one point, we went up and helped one of their guys on their track prep and talked to him about like ways to soften up the clay and ways to prep the clay and like how to get the water deeper in the clay. Like these people want your input, like especially because like, so I'm a landscaper, so I don't prep a lot of racetracks, but I work with dirt every day. I know what it does. I know how things affect dirt. So I had a bunch of conversations with their main track prep guy last year. And I would say they went from having a awful surface at the beginning of the year to a very solid one by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And they've kind of carried that trend into this year, and they've just gotten better, and they've come up with their own ideas, and they're just killing it. And no, that doesn't have anything to do with me. I gave them a handful of ideas that they then took and multiplied by 1,000 and doubled down on it. And now we have a great racetrack. It's just a better place to race, you know? And if you multiply that by like all of us drivers, instead of whining on the internet has turned us into weenie whiners. If we stop doing that and go back to the old method of, hey man, yeah, well, you know, the wiener whiners, dude, the old cock whinies. But if you go back to like just walk up to somebody and go, here's my opinion, here's what I've seen works, and take that advice and do what you want with it. And just, no one's asking you to come run the grader, okay? Just give them your input, and don't be a dick, okay? That's my 2 cents on this whole topic, I think. So, I hate the internet.
We're on the internet. We are the internet now, so you hate us.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Al Gore, for creating the internet, or whoever is
Member
created.
Pig.
Wasn't it? Isn't that like the greatest rumor? Is Al Gore created the internet or whatever the hell? Wasn't that like the
I don't
long...
even know what you're talking about.
No, okay, whatever.
Okay. That's one of those deep rabbit hole conspiracies I ain't been into yet.
It's just one of the few that you haven't. The other conspiracy is how we rig our iRacing leagues against Jesse.
Well, that's not even a conspiracy. Them's just facts.
All right, enough about track prep and all that good stuff.
You want to talk about Bloomer at Eldora?
Let's talk about Bloomer at Eldora. I'm sure that Jason feels a certain way about that race car, right? Because that was a Barry Wright.
So let's go.
Was
let's
it,
just
or
go
was
in
that
Or was that the other?
I think that was a Team Zero Bloomquist car himself.
Oh.
Let's just go in a round table and like one by one. Jason, you start, then Daniel, then me.
What are we discussing? Whose fault it was?
The whole thing. Whose fault it was? What could have been done different? Was it intentional?
So, it was, in my opinion, watching it, it was one of those racing deals where both people were trying to run their ideal line, and and it, we see it when we iRace together all the time, where people come together in the same spot. But Bab was starting to come downhill to set himself up for the corner, but in my opinion, Bloomquist just was blasting it in there, no care that anybody else was going to be around him. Like, that lane was supposed to be his. How many times have you ever watched Shannon Babb race something and you're like, oh my gosh, that was a dirty move from Shannon Babb? I don't think anybody... maybe at some point when I was a twinkle in my dad's eye or something, he was doing that, but I don't... I've never seen Shannon Babb really race dirty. He's one of the most respected guys in the game. And then you got Bloomer, who's love him or hate him type of person. And then he goes and he's pointing fingers over the situation, going, I don't know what the hell he was thinking. The hell were you thinking? You just tore some shit up is what you did for the second time this year. But I don't think I can blame Babb on that one. I understand where he was aiming his car. Right, I think I understand, I should say. But I think Scott could have tried to pinch his momentum down in that situation, run a lower line, but he was trying to maximize the momentum that his car had and whatnot, and it didn't benefit him. It put a spectacular show on of a flip.
So what do you think, Daniel?
Bab. Bam, 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 bam. I kind of agree with Jason. There's two guys racing for the same little bit of real estate. You know, I watched it a couple times because it seemed like everybody's pits that I walked by at Freedom, they had to show me because they're like, "Oh my God, did you see this?" And without me being like yes or no, because I've already seen it 50 times, they showed me it, and it just at first I thought Bab just hucked him. You know, that's what I originally thought, and then after
that's what the aliens wanted you to think.
That's what the probe that I had when I was a small child. Actually, they were radio
that
signaling me down. No, it's definitely just a racing deal. Unfortunately, again, we were talking about the high speeds of big tracks, and you know, there's not when you're going that fast on dirt, you can't just check up or whatever. And obviously there's some blind spots, especially, you know, sometimes it's hard to know if you're clear or not, even when you're looking past your radiator cap, because sometimes you can't just see down that far where your nose is.
So you're saying head and neck restraint systems aren't safe anymore because you can't see outside of the car?
No, you rather not be able to see than, you know, die. You know, that's cool. I would prefer all my race car drivers to stay alive. You can wreck shit. You can replace race cars, not people, dude. So I don't know what you're saying. You know, so the too long didn't read racing deal. Maybe you make a couple, two guys making a bunch of mistakes all at the same time, leading to catastrophe. And you know what? If it was Jesse and Zane, I would have different opinions, but unfortunately, it's not.
I think it's definitely a racing deal. I think Scott was like a rocket ship coming up, and Bab was trying to make the corner. I do think Bab had options, but I think it's unfair. Like on a track that fast, he could have lifted for like a millisecond, cleared him, and cut under. Right, but like. You've got a couple things working against you there. Visibility for one. The speed at which he's got to make that decision, right? I mean, everybody's acting like Shannon Babb had like 20 seconds to make a decision and didn't, right? Bloomer was coming up, Babb was coming down, and they zigged when they should have zagged, and Bloomer went to the wall, right? So it's definitely highly contested on the internet. Everybody wants to be like, well, Scott Bloomquist is washed up and he's an asshole. I mean, the camera angle is damning. I can see why Scott came to that conclusion, right? That he was just turned into the wall, especially when you're fired up after the race and then somebody puts a microphone in your face. You know what I'm saying? Can you at least see how he came to that conclusion? You know, on the flip side, you know, the more you think about it, the more it becomes like, yeah, it's definitely a racing deal. I mean, I don't blame Bab for not lifting. I don't blame. I mean, Bloomer was coming up a lot, so you know he was basically on top of him. It was just definitely it was an unfortunate. It sucks to see a guy that age having this be like the end of his career. You know, like you want a guy like Bloomer to just. Not necessarily go out on top, but not go out with a bunch of wrecks. And, you know, it just sucks. It just sucks to see, I think. And I think he's still one of the more talented guys around. I think he's got a litany of back problems and stuff, though, right? And it's just hard to race through that shit.
He just had cancer and everything, too. I mean,
right.
I'm watching the video again right now. And they cross each other up. And yeah, they're both turning into the middle of the track.
Yeah.
Talking about Bloomquist, though, man, he's still fast for everything he has wrong with him. Imagine if I'm not saying like in a perfect world, you know, what if he didn't have all these problems, you know, health problems we can't change. Bloomer gonna Bloomer, you know, he's gonna be the absolute crazy wild man that he is. But
right.
quick
like,
thing while I'm watching this.
if he was able to feel the car.
What direction are Scott's wheels turned before contact happens?
I mean, I'm not watching it, but I feel like when I did watch it, he's like straight.
They're slightly to the right.
Are they?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and I mean, he was obviously coming up the track. I don't think anybody would dispute that.
Yeah.
I mean, and yeah, I mean, it is what it is. It was unfortunate. And, one thing that I hate about this washed up Scott Bloomquist narrative is, a lot of people in his position choose to just kind of ride off into the sunset racing at local dirt tracks. That dude is still trying to go out and do it at the highest level. And, it's easy to watch Scott Bloomquist at the Dream qualify like 10th or whatever it is and go, oh, he sucks, dude. Oh, what an idiot. But it's like, man, that's better than you do. You know what I mean?
A lot better than
yeah,
anybody.
I mean, you some of your best local race car drivers aren't going to show up and beat him. So, I mean, he's still at a higher level than most people. It's just your frame of reference is kind of skewed, Because I don't think I would blame Scott for just being like, man, I want to run local races and not go far from home and just kind of have fun again, But he's still driven to go do it at this high level, and obviously he's struggling, right? But I don't think that means he's a shit race car driver. I think that means he's how old is he now? I mean, in his 70s?
Honestly, no, he's not that 60s? Old.
He's got to be at least in his 60s, right? My dad's in his 60s. Well, he's got to be at least my dad's age, right?
I don't know.
Maybe he's just 30 years old, but all the
life events.
All the life events. Scott Bloomquist has seen some shit, including aliens, and that really does age you a lot.
Yeah,
he's 60 years old.
He's had a lot of big wrecks too, and he's lived his whole life on the road.
Well, he went through an era of time where, he was still racing competitively, but I believe he was having issues with nerves in his legs and couldn't even feel the pedals.
From what? Well, yeah, because that was earlier, not this year, but
like 2 years ago or something.
Tried to come back, but even before that, because of his motorcycle wreck, he said, he didn't have any feeling in his ass or whatever to be able to feel the race car. I think that's what it was said. You can, or maybe that's some as Mr. Eisenhower would say here, some redneck at a racetrack told me one time, that could have been from the wreck or whatever, but that's gotta be hard to drive a race car when you can't feel it moving. Like, I have only limited experience racing go-karts and, rental go-karts, and
it's very hard.
Need to feel what the car is doing underneath of you to really, do your thing.
Well, and you don't realize how much you rely on something like that. So get on iRacing and try to race without force feedback, right? Race on a set of plastic pedals that has no feedback at all. No spring, nothing. That's what it feels like to race without feeling your fingers or your ass or your feet. That's no joke, right? You're entirely on muscle memory at that point, So that's got to be tough. That's got to be tough, especially for a guy like Bloomer, who is known for really being finessey. I mean, he was one of the best guys ever in those long 150 lap races. I mean, he could go out and baby a set of tires with the best of them. He was one of the guys to beat in one of those 100 lappers.
Dude, speaking of 100 lappers, I was at the World 100 when they did the 50 and 51st or whatever, or the 49th and 50th, or whatever order they did them. They did the two World 100s back to back. I was doing photos, and great Bloomer story. They couldn't find him for driver intros because he was late getting there, and Joseph Joyner was up there, and they were reading off all Scott Bloomquist accomplishments, and like the Eldora girls had Joseph Joyner by his fucking arms, and he's like, "This isn't me, dude. This isn't me." And then Scott comes like barreling through onto the stage, and he's doing the fucking the fucking Nixon pose or whatever, and then he like he started up front, I think, for one of the World 100s that year or something like that because of the invert or whatever. But like he took off like a goddamn rocket ship. Like everybody knew whatever he was doing, it wasn't gonna work because like he was like lap 8 and he was like taking the field to school, and then I think they caught him and then he spun out, and I think damage ended his night. I've seen so many races that I don't even remember really 100% if that was all true. But I remember he was late to driver intros, and it was so fucking funny. Because they're like, "Where's Scott?" They're like, "He's a 100 million time Eldora winner," and Joseph Joyner's just like, "That's not me, dude. That's not me, brother. That's not it.
That's not me, brother."
It was just gold. I mean, man, could you imagine if Scott Bloomquist had a podcast and all the stories of him being on the road or all those? Because he said like on Dale Jr. Not to get like sidetracked about like going to Volusia and locking himself in and doing setups all night or whatever. Like just those kind of stories that come out because he, raced in a totally different era all the way up until this modern era. It's got to be wild when they call them the World of Outlaws, but back then they really were outlaws on the road. Just any big race they would come into town.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, back then the cars were a lot more equal, and there was a lot more guys on shoestring budgets doing cool stuff. I mean, it was a totally different sport back then, and innovation I think went a lot further. I mean, innovation's always the name of the game, but I think he pioneered a lot of stuff, and he gets a bad rap now because of all the accusations and all the stuff. But I mean, it's hard to deny Bloomer, man. I mean, he was a lot of fun to watch. I always enjoyed watching him. I never really cared what people had to say about him. I mean, I don't really know the guy personally. I've met him a handful of times, but it's I've always been a fan. Put it that way. And I know that's not how everybody feels.
Super nice to me when I've met him in person, and that's coming as a media member. That's not me being coming up to him at a meet and greet or whatever. Just, nice guy. And man, you almost kind of cheer for the bad boys. The more it pisses people off, I've always kind of rooted for the villains in racing because every good story, every good racetrack needs a villain and a hero. And man, when Scott rolls in, whether you love him or hate him, they fucking tuned in, didn't they?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Do you guys want to talk at all tonight about aerodynamics and late models, or you want to save that for another day?
We can save that. It's way past my bedtime.
I'm getting pretty whipped myself. We've probably been pretty whipped since the beginning. This is probably the lowest
term that
podcast.
Martin Truex Jr. used. I'm basically retarded right now because my brain is slowed down.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I've been pounding coffee this whole podcast, trying to yawn less and be aware. But
dude, no, screw
typical
that.
Daniel hosted a 70-lap SR8 race with 96 cautions and 70 laps.
Dude, it's you and the Brodeo show, dude.
Brodeo.
Brodeo.
He's gonna hate you.
Oh man, dude, it's honestly, it's a lot of fun once you get going, but man, it's basically like super speedway racing, so cautions are going to come out, and we have a whole bunch of guys that, we aren't like professionals, so it's going to happen. And especially, we like to do a lot of stupid stuff that we know isn't going to work out, but we do it for the memes. And, I am so glad that, I know the Cluster Truck League is, the money league, and that's what we take serious, and whatever. But this is kind of, some of us Not
I
you.
guess.
Just
I
because
understand.
you're naturally talented at jumpy trucks.
There's a lot. I'm just saying, there's a lot of wrecking for something that's being taken so serious.
It's not. It's taken more serious
it's
than
like
going full
I'm not
wide
gonna lie,
at
I forgot
Dover.
it was a paid league
Yeah.
until you just said that. So
Let's. It's like old Brody getting all mad at me. It's like I've never done anything to him other than get wrecked by him. And then he's like, "Oh, and Jesse and Dave want to keep me down." What?
You are the
Yeah.
problem, Jesse.
Keep in mind, we basically took voluntary EOLs, right? We started like what, 7th and 8th or something, and came from the back, and we were within a second, and he's like, "Yeah, they didn't gain on me at all." It's like, dude, when we first got into second, we were like 12 seconds down. Relax, but it's all good. Oh, the old trophy truck leagues; those are my favorite. Dude.
cluster truck.
Yeah, the cluster truck cup.
Big old cluster trucking.
A lot of heat brewing in that league.
Yeah, there's a lot of rivalries going on, I would say. And you want to know what?
My only
Rivalries, I'll
rivalry
tell you.
is the racetrack, dude. That kills me.
The inside and outside wall really kicks your ass.
It'll get you, man.
You could watch that on the Slide Job Racing Network. Marty, you don't have to pay us for the plug. It's all right, brother.
You should though.
Well, he's a struggling college kid. Can't afford them. Our $1,500,000 sponsorship fees. Totally
this giant,
legit.
world-renowned podcast.
This dude, the Woe Nelly Worldwide Productions Podcast Network Incorporated. All right, we're just rambling now. To the moon. Let's wrap this Shelf Hangers episode 4. See you guys.
See you later.
Lay.